have improved heating systems. But there is one very interesting heating system, and this is internal, and these are the muscles that we have all. And we can do exercise, and instead of sitting there and freezing, well, we can do exercise, which has all kinds of other positive effects. And then I'm very glad to have Ylva from Copenhagen again giving a talk this year, and she some of you may know this is one of the pillars of this symposium, and she has even contributed before the symposium was established now 9 years ago. So I hand over to you, Ylva. I'm very glad that you're.
Thank you very much, Martin. Let's see if I can share my screen here. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, and it's always a great pleasure for me to participate in this meeting. It's a diversity, and it's really interesting. I really enjoy it, all the different aspects. And I've heard of brain and muscle, and so we are going into the cardiovascular system here and looking at arterial thrombosis and how exercise can affect that. See, let's start by looking at what arterial thrombosis actually is. So it's the formation of blood clots in the arterial system. It's the cause of events such as stroke in the brain and myocardial infarcts. Risk factors for formation of arterial blood clots are aspects such as diabetes, atherosclerosis, smoking, hypertension, all of the normal standard risk factors in cardiovascular disease. And ultimately, of course, it is often the blood clot formation that is the cause of serious conditions or even death. So we can ask ourselves, why do we then develop blood clots in these conditions? And I'm sure you are all aware of that the body has its own way of creating biological band-aids, which is called hemostasis. And it's, of course, a very important function in the body to prevent blood loss in the case that you are injured. And it's an exceptionally complex process. It's very well regulated in individuals. And it's only when it becomes uncontrolled, you could say, or when it's stimulated in the wrong way, that it goes into leading to blood clots. So I'm not going to take you through this whole complex scheme, but I will show you some markers in this pathway. So I'm just going to very briefly take you through this. So here up here, if you have injury to blood vessel, let's say you cut your finger, for example, then the platelets that circulate in your blood will notice this, part because there are compounds that are exposed in the vessel wall, such as collagen here. When the platelets are activated, they get arms and they become sticky, and they sort of aggregate, stick to each other, but also to the vascular wall. That's kind of what you see here in this little picture. What also happens here is that you activate a coagulation cascade. You see that here. It's very complex, many compounds involved. But this activation leads to the formation of a fibrin mesh. So you get fibrin in your plasma, and you get a fibrin mesh, sort of a net, you could say, that glues the blood clot together so that you have a fairly strong clot, and that can prevent blood from being lost from the vascular system. So this is the sort of normal hemostasis. And then, of course, as I say, if you have uncontrolled hemostasis, if you have inflammation, for example, in the cardiovascular system, then this can lead to blood clot formation instead. So we're asking the question here of whether regular physical activity can reduce the risk of arterial blood clots. And actually, we've done a few studies on this because not that much was known in this area beforehand. And I will show you markers that indicate, first of all, platelet reactivity. So this initial kind of reaction to damage, very important part of hemostasis and thrombosis. And then I'll show you a marker of this final, sort of a template of this final blood clot microstructure. So Martina Lundberg, as you see here up in the corner, she was a pharmacologist who came to my lab and did a postdoc. She was very interested in the connection between physical activity and arterial thrombosis. What she did is she took 3 groups of middle-aged men. You can see them here: sedentary, moderately trained, and well-trained men. See the number of exercise they do per week, from 1.4 to 7.2 to 12.5 hours a week, quite a lot of exercise. And here in this graph, what you see is the response of platelets to activators, you could say. You have collagen and you have adrenaline. So what you do is you isolate sort of a platelet-rich plasma, and you add it to these activators, and you see how much aggregation you get of the platelets. That's how the assay works. So the more, the higher the curve here, the more reactive your platelets are. And what this graph shows you is that well-trained men here in the red had less aggregation, both to collagen and adrenaline, suggesting that platelet reactivity goes down with the training state. So then we go over to this microstructure marker, so a global indicator more than of the risk of blood clot. And what this is we take fresh blood and we put it in what's called a rheometer. And when you do that, it has to be very fresh. The rheometer assesses sort of the clot microstructure by looking at the point where the blood goes from a fluid to a solid. And there is an illustration here done by electron microscopy, and you see in the middle here, that's your good clot. That's how this fibrin mesh structure should look, more or less. And if you then look at the bad blood clot here to your right, you see that it's very dense, thin fibers, very difficult for the body or for pharmacology to dissolve. It's not a good clot. This is not a good indication. To the left, you have, on the other hand, in septic shock and so forth, a loose clot, which of course can cause bleeding in case you have damage. So this DF marker up here is what you're going to look at. It's the sort of the number representing this kind of clot microstructure. So in the corner down here, you see Lena and Kate, who have just completed a study in middle-aged women. And these women have trained floorball, as you see here, for 10 to 12 weeks. They have cycled if they had knee injuries, but they preferred, for sure, the floorball. It's a great game. And they then did a lot of tests, but one of the things they did was that they took blood before and after to look at this clot microstructure. And so here are the results. And we see that with these 12 weeks of training, there was a decrease in the clot microstructure. And here to the right, you see sort of what the template of this clot microstructure would look like before versus after training. So definitely a positive effect of training. So I'm just showing you examples of these training effects. We have several other studies that also indicate that excess training reduces the risk of arterial thrombosis. And there is also data in the literature that would suggest this. But then we were also interested in understanding how acute exercise would affect thrombogenicity. And here again, Kate and Lena have been part of this study, and what they did is they took some healthy controls, a mean age of 70 years about, and some stroke patients who had had a stroke in the past 6 months. They subjected them to light cycling exercise, about 10-15 minutes of light to moderate exercise. And what you see here is that this acute bout of exercise increased the DF, or the fractal dimension, or your clot microstructure density, after the exercise. Both groups, both in the stroke patients, although they are on medication, antiplatelet medication, and then both groups are having an increase in this microstructure density. After an hour, we see that it's almost back to normal. It's a little longer here in the stroke patients. So the acute effect is, of course, not so good. But then the next question is, of course, doesn't matter what your training status is. And so I'm taking you back to Martina's study here on the 3 groups of middle-aged men, the sedentary and the moderately trained and the well-trained. And we're back to looking at platelet reactivity. And what she then did was she looked at the effect of acute exercise on platelet reactivity in these 3 groups. And first, we have a sort of low exercise intensity. This is one leg knee extensor exercise. And what it shows you is that the moderately trained and the well-trained actually show a lower level of platelet reactivity when they do this exercise, whereas the sedentary group doesn't have show a difference. And then she looked at a slightly higher exercise intensity. Here it's related to their capacity. So we see the sedentary did 17 watts and the moderately trained 23 and the well-trained 32 watts. It's evidently more. And it's interesting because what you see here is then the sedentary have this increase in platelet reactivity corresponding to what you saw in the clot microstructure. Whereas the 2 other groups do not seem to have a change with these higher intensities, even though they're doing more work. So overall, of course, this shows that exercise can increase your platelet reactivity, but less so if you are already trained. So to conclude, lifelong but also short-term physical activity seem to reduce the susceptibility to arterial thrombosis. So acutely with exercise, you can have an increase in platelet reactivity and the microstructure of an incipient blood clot, but less so than if you are trained. So with that, I thank the group and thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Ylva, for your talk. I see hands clapping and hands raising, both in Jörn's box. So Jörn, you are the first one.
Great, this is really interesting and important work. I wonder if I have 2 questions. I mean, one being, do you think that the acute effect is due to an enhanced activation of clotting factors, or is it more of a removal of blood volume that's residing in the muscle at rest, and then it's spelled out of the muscle once you start exercising, because you're measuring probably venous blood and not, you know, in the exercising muscle? And second question would be, is this acute effect really dangerous? Have people looked at, for example, the acute history of exercise prior to thromboembolic events? This could be done for, you know, you could ask people that get transferred to a hospital and ask them, when was your last exercise bout?
Thank you very much, Jörn. Thank you for your nice comment and good questions. I don't have an answer to your first question. What we do know, we have done some studies trying to figure out what it is about exercise that gives this, and 2 things we do seem to see is that the increased shear stress in itself, so the increase in blood flow when you do exercise has an impact on thrombosis, or our indicators of thrombosis, I should say. And the other thing is that catecholamines, adrenaline and noradrenaline, has a clear impact and of course, when you do exercise, you have an increase in sympathetic activity. Your point is good. I couldn't answer, but your point is good that this could be an issue too. It doesn't seem that the hematocrit of blood matters all that much, but yeah, whether it is an exchange, you know, of fluids and this actually affects something, I couldn't answer, but it's a good question. The other question you have is, well, we know that some people have myocardial infarcts when they go exercising. It's very rare, so I wouldn't consider it an issue. Really, I don't think there's a danger of it, but of course, if you have an individual who's had a stroke, who is prone to thrombosis, and who is not taking their medication, then maybe there could be an issue. But as I say, we have worked together with a neurologist on this, who has been very heavily involved, and she seems to say that there is no real, you know, it's not common. It's not something they see. Every once in a while, you get very well-trained individuals that have strokes or they have myocardial infarcts. That's a difficult one to understand, but she says that that's the kind of person who does too much, you know, the high achievers. They don't sleep well, they work too much, they train all the time, they don't give themselves any rest, and, you know, she believes that that probably is a connection to that. Yeah.
But maybe these results call for action and a study. I mean, it would be a simple design really for all people who present in A&E with thromboembolic events, to ask them, when was your last exercise bout? And then you ask them, when was your how, you know, how often do you normally train? And then you could actually figure out whether there's any relationship.
Yes, I agree. It could be done. Most of them don't exercise, that's the issue.
So I have also one question that goes back to actually a meeting we had a couple of years ago. So as you know, well, there have been millions of euro spent by the European Union to find genes for what you've just described. So haven't you missed here important risk factors, Ylva, by ignoring the genetic disposition of these patients?
Well, I mean, I should not ignore the genetic predisposition, but I think that probably there are other factors that are much more important. Just like Michael Joyner would say that genetics is an issue, but it's certainly a lot about lifestyle as well in this. And I think these are important data in terms of trying to, I mean, we try all we can to promote exercise for people, but I think this is just another piece of evidence that suggests that it is a good idea to maintain activity through life. But yeah, your point is taken well, and I know why you ask it.
Not everyone knows this, but in retrospect, I mean, there have been lots of studies in this post-human genome project time from, let's say, 2000 to 2010. And specifically on this disease condition, where there have been studies, and we had some involvement by doing the data management and so on, and it was in a sense a complete disaster. So they could not find a single gene, although that was really the hope of everyone doing these studies, that would somehow determine or explain or whatever the things you've just been describing. And at that time, well, we had the impression that such studies need to have a detailed measurement of actually exercise and human activity in order to capture what is the real important part.